Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth indie game reviews on just about every title we can get our hands on, and today we'll be taking a look at an in-depth review of The Liar Princess and the Blind Prince. If you've seen The Liar Princess and the Blind Prince on the eShop, or maybe thought about even buying the collector's edition just because it looked so unique, I would say that you definitely wouldn't be disappointed, but that really depends on what you're buying the game for. Represented in a characteristically storybook style with an absolutely magical soundtrack, we're introduced to a world of magical creatures, witches, wolves, and of course princes and princesses. But how our story actually starts is following a curious prince who wanders night after night into an enchanted wood to bask in the beautiful songs of what he doesn't quite yet know is a giant wolf. However, the prince's consistent fanboying over her songs has made the wolf a bit curious and even somewhat appreciative of the prince's attention. And one day, when the prince manages to climb up to her peak unannounced, in order to protect the prince from what she knows will be seen as her own monstrous form, she attempts to push him away but accidentally ends up hurting the prince in the process. And while this does essentially start off the story and overall tone of the game, it is where we can start to discover some of those more hidden, darker social critiques that will be encountered and expanded upon throughout the duration of the gameplay. If you ever did play games like Aiko way back in the day, where you had to lead a counterpart through a puzzle platformer, this is pretty much the type of gameplay we'll be getting into. Built mostly upon the concept of solid environment-based puzzles, the wolf who has sought the help of a witch in order to turn herself into a princess must lead the blind prince back to the witch in order to try and cure his sight. And as the princess, you'll be able to interact and hold hands with the prince, leading him through these puzzles, but you'll also be susceptible to the wild beasts of the forest and unable to jump through larger gaps. And in essence, it's this dynamic of being able to swap between forms as the princess or the wolf that will be used to navigate and complete most of the puzzles throughout the game. However, as you do progress chapter through chapter in this storybook game, the prince becomes less of a tag-along and actually more of a functional character. Eventually, you'll encounter scenarios where the prince must be encouraged to walk on his own instead of having his hand held, as well as the need for him to be able to pick up and carry and put down certain items. And accordingly, as the game progresses and you become more familiar with certain aspects of this puzzle platformer, these new elements are incorporated one after the other in a way that actually feels really nice and organic. As you play through the game as well, there are other elements of gameplay that might not be explicitly made aware to the player, but actually do seem to comprise most of the game's character. Diving into the menu screen for just a second, we see a lot of options for things that aren't directly related to the story or the gameplay, and these are mostly unlockable elements of art or story that are gained through finding hidden collectibles all throughout the game. Being able to navigate toward more difficult areas of the puzzle may cause you to find a new flower to give your prince, and exploring all throughout the dark corners of the levels may help you to find floating leaves, which also aid you to unlocking new collectibles in the menu. But as for my own personal playthrough, I didn't really even discover this until I was about 3/4 of the way through the game, and once figuring out about the collectibles, especially the leaves, I started to realize how many of them that I had missed through the game because I didn't know what they were for. But then again, I guess that does just add to the incentive to play through it one more time. However, on that note, that does bring us to a bit of a point that we might need to critique about the game, and that is, in a sense, the replay value. Though the story is definitely deep and a little bit twisted, as it would be in some of the more classic fairy tales, the game's intrigue is pretty much completed once completing the story. And while wanting to see that last page turned and find out how the story ends will definitely keep you intrigued all the way through your first gameplay, the puzzles being on the more simple end of the spectrum, except for one crazy one, aren't really enough to challenge a player that might be a little more advanced in the puzzle or the platforming genres. And while I definitely don't want to address this game as a walking sim, but definitely as a story-driven platformer, the platforming elements do suffer a little bit mechanically. The frail prince, to be expected, is definitely part of the gameplay that's supposed to limit your actions and abilities, but specifically in the jumping and the falling mechanics, I really do feel as though a lot of players are going to expect that those are mechanics that should have been tightened up a little bit before the game's release. But overall, and despite these flaws, I would have to say that The Liar Princess and the Blind Prince is an incredible game and just a really amazing experience. And though maybe it's not absolutely everything it could be, it's definitely worth having, and I'm actually really happy that I bought the collector's edition. Its soundtrack, art, and role reversal with a deeper, darker meaning just make for a great story and a great experience for the player. But anyway, that does about wrap up the review of The Liar Princess and the Blind Prince, now on the Switch. So if you enjoyed the review or found it helpful, feel free to throw me a like or a comment to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indies coming out literally every single day, so there's always going to be something new to find right here. But since I could only cover a few games a week, if you want a hint at which games might be being reviewed next, you can follow us on Twitter, and if you want to help me build this channel and make these reviews, I could always use another Patreon. But anyway, this has been Budget Gamers, so as always, thanks for watching.